So, first of all, welcome to Headway Day 1 and congratulations. Seriously, because you've taken the first step and most people just never really get their arse in gear, they never get around to it. So, I'm really looking forward to meeting you. If we haven't met already, we haven't spoken. The idea behind Headway is that this program and these series of recordings have been designed by me to provide extra consistency for my clients and to give me a basic grounding, almost like a sort of must do of skills that I want my clients to have, which are designed to help them to make changes in the right direction. So we're going to be combining the consistency and the structure that you can get from using an app, doing something regularly, reflecting, learning, and taking small actions with something that I think is incredibly important, and that's actual face-to-face dialogue with a real human being, namely me. So hi, this is me, James Lawton, where, like I say, we're going to meet properly in a few days' time if we haven't already. But before we get there, there's some groundwork that I want us to do. So you'll have noticed that when you first logged into the app, the first thing I asked you to explore was your values. And there's a reason for that, because I genuinely believe that if we're going to make meaningful changes to our lives, we've got to start by understanding the person who's actually living that life. We've got to start with who we actually are. Now, I've spent a huge amount of my own life looking for answers to this stuff. Why do we behave the way we behave? Why do we keep doing certain things even when we know they're not particularly good for us? Why can somebody say something to one person and they shrug it off while somebody else hears exactly the same words and gets completely triggered by it? And why can we consciously understand something that is irrational and yet still feel it? Human beings, let's be honest, are bloody interesting, and there are patterns underneath patterns underneath patterns. And so one of the things I've learned is that understanding something consciously doesn't necessarily mean you can immediately change it. You can know better and still not do better, if that makes sense. And that's why I wanted to start Headway with something deeper, values. So I thought what I'd do is give you a bit of an example from my own life. Now, my three core values are adventure, discipline, and loyalty. And I'm pretty sure they always have been, except I didn't always know that. You see, when I was younger, I actually spent quite a lot of time thinking there was something slightly wrong with me because there are these contradictions in my personality that didn't seem to make much sense. On the one hand, I could be incredibly disciplined. I'd train Monday to Friday from pretty much from the age of 15. I'd get myself into the gym, I'd work hard, I'd push myself. And then the weekend would arrive and I would be completely reckless. I'd get absolutely wasted. I'd do stupid things, sometimes dangerous things, sometimes things that were probably not particularly legal. And I was constantly looking for that buzz, that excitement. I suppose that feeling that something was just going to happen or was happening. And for quite a long time, I just sort of saw that as a flaw in myself. Then, years later, when I really started exploring my own values, something clicked. One of my strongest values was adventure. And then suddenly, of course, knowing this, I could look back at that younger version of myself differently. Adventure wasn't the problem. The problem was that I hadn't understood it. And so instead of adventure, I was getting misadventure. I was unconsciously trying to satisfy a perfectly legitimate part of myself in ways that weren't particularly good for me. And of course, once I understood that, something changed. It was very easy. I started deliberately putting adventure into my life. I started planning things, going places, taking trips, getting out on the water, getting on bikes, and putting myself into situations where I could explore and experience something new, challenge myself, and get that feeling of being properly alive, not just being wasted on the weekend. Because here's something else I learned. If something really matters to you, sometimes you've actually got to plan for it in order to make it happen. And most people aren't necessarily up for the same adventures you are. So I stopped waiting for adventure to happen to me and I started creating it. Same value, completely different behavior, and of course, completely different outcomes. Now, the next one is discipline. And discipline has served me incredibly well throughout my life. I can get shit done. There's no two ways about that. But when I was younger, discipline had a voice. And that voice was basically a drill sergeant. So I'd get myself into the gym on a Monday morning after a fairly heavy weekend, feeling pretty low. And there he'd be, come on, get on with it. Stop being weak. Stop being a pussy. Stop, lift more weights. Go, go, go. And to be fair to him, he called me some pretty horrible things. And he wasn't very nice. And there was no compassion in there. And there was very little, if any, encouragement. But it was discipline. And it was discipline powered by criticism. And for quite a long time, I just thought that's what discipline was. I suppose that's sort of David Goggins' flavour of discipline. But then, of course, that became a bit contradicted as I started to understand other values in my life, like loyalty. Now, I've always been fiercely loyal to the people I love, my friends, my family, and the people I care about. And when I became a father, something quite interesting happened because I wanted my children to develop discipline. Of course I did. I wanted them to understand effort and persistence and responsibility. But I didn't want them growing up with that same bloody drill sergeant living inside their heads. I didn't want them believing that the only way to motivate themselves was to attack themselves. And then suddenly my values had to start working together. My value of discipline couldn't just operate on its own anymore. Loyalty changed it. If I'm loyal to these kids, if I genuinely want the best for them, then what kind of discipline do I want to model? And of course, that question in itself started changing things. Not overnight, but gradually. And the drill sergeant didn't need to disappear completely. Sometimes you do actually need to tell yourself to get your ass out of bed and get on with it. But he didn't need to be in charge anymore. So discipline could now, and now does for me, come from self-respect rather than self-hatred. And it's a significant change and one that I feel so much better for in all aspects of my life. So adventure can now come from exploration rather than recklessness. Loyalty could help me decide who and what deserve my energy. And then that's when I started understanding something really important about values, that they don't actually exist in isolation. They work together, or they should work together. And when our behaviour lines up with the things that genuinely matter to us, life tends to feel different. There's a sense of congruence, I suppose. Things feel right. That doesn't mean they're always easy, of course. Sometimes doing the things that align most strongly with your values is bloody difficult. But underneath the difficulty, there's this sense of, yeah, this is me, And of course, the opposite is true as well. Sometimes everything looks fine from the outside, yet something inside us feels very wrong. We might be irritated by it, resentful, frustrated, ashamed, or maybe just restless, And quite often, somewhere underneath that feeling, there's a value being compromised. And so that's really why, with this program, we're starting here with our values. Because your beliefs can change surprisingly quickly. Sometimes one conversation, one experience, or maybe just one little momentary aha light bulb moment can completely change something you've believed for years. But values are different. Now, don't get me wrong, values can change. They evolve and they grow and they morph as our lives change. But generally, our deepest values don't change quickly. They're woven, as I suppose you'd say, they're woven pretty deeply into who we are. So rather than immediately trying to turn you into some new and improved version of yourself, we're going to do something much more interesting. We're going to understand you. And so that's your first bit of work for today. You've already been through the values exercise. And if you sort of rushed it or skipped through it, please make sure you spend some time really getting deep and down with that, okay? Because you really want to dial in on your core values. And then what I want you to do is I want you to test them against your actual life. So first, if you could think of a time when you really got something right. It doesn't have to be an enormous achievement, just a time, just a situation where things flowed. Maybe you made a decision, you handled something well, and you felt good about yourself afterwards. Maybe other people responded well too. And just sort of go back there for a moment and remember what happened. Yeah? What did you do? How did you behave? And then from that, with the having identified your core values, just try to identify how those values were being honoured in that moment in life. Okay, how were your actions aligned with the person that you actually are? Because there's always something to learn in there. And then once you've done that, I want you to do the opposite. I want you to think of a situation that didn't go so well, something that perhaps you regret, a decision that didn't sit right, maybe a relationship, an argument, a period of your life, whatever comes up, it doesn't really matter. And we're not going to beat ourselves up about it. We're not here to do that at all, okay? We're here to learn. So just to get curious rather than judgmental, look back and ask yourself, where were you out of alignment? Where was things going on that didn't really sit with your values? Were the people you were with, pulling you in the wrong direction? Were you in an environment that didn't fit who you were? Why were you in that environment? Did you say yes to something when inside you were saying no? Did you stay quiet when you should have spoken? Did you chase something that actually wasn't you? And we're going to talk a lot more about that in coming recordings. But the really useful question is, what could you have done differently that would have brought your actions into alignment with your values? Okay, so that's where this sort of analysis starts to become really useful, because you don't just go, oh, this was a mistake or this was something that didn't go well. You can actually then start to go, this is the lesson now learned from this event. And once you start noticing them, you start getting choices that perhaps you didn't realize you had before. You start recognizing the environments where you thrive, the people who bring the best out in you, the situations that repeatedly pull you away from yourself, and gradually your actions can start lining up with the things that genuinely matter to you. So that's what we're doing here. Not perfection, progress. So that's your job for today. Take a little time, reflect, write down whatever comes up. Think about when things have gone well and where your values align. Think about the things that haven't gone so well and where they may have been, a bit of a misalignment. Please don't try to write a perfect answer, because there just isn't one. Just be honest, put it into your daily reflection, into the app, because this is the beginning of us building a much clearer picture of you. And I will be bearing your values in mind throughout all of our interactions going forward. Okay, so I want to just leave today's recording with one thought, and this is it. Progress isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more aligned with who you've always been. Okay, and so this is where Headway starts. Well done. Get stuck into the app, and I will see you tomorrow for day 2. Thank you.